It's been yet another busy last couple weeks in the world of the UFC, the mixed martial arts top promotion where all the world's best fighters do battle within the octagon. It's a sport with a dizzying array of egos, a wealth of intense feuds, and plenty of drama at all times. So much so that it can be difficult to keep up with all of it at all times. Have no fear, because in today's video we're going to be going over all the biggest news stories from the last couple of weeks of the UFC. First up, Kevin Lee has left. In some ways, the story of Kevin Lee is rather sad. The American fighter was considered by many to be a future champion when he arrived in the UFC, an excellent lightweight division competitor who made terrific use of an extensive history as an amateur wrestler. His run of victories in 2016 and 2017 in particular had fans excited about his potential as a champion. He impressed so much that he was eventually booked to fight Tony Ferguson in October 2017, with the interim UFC lightweight championship on the line. Despite an impressive showing, Lee was eventually forced to tap out in the third round. He would rebound quickly with a victory over Edson Barbosa, but from there he seemed to just totally fall apart, losing 4 of his next 5 fights. Daniel Rodriguez in August of this year would prove to be Lee's final fight, as he lost by unanimous decision and was subsequently suspended from the UFC after testing positive for Adderall, which he had been using to help with his recently diagnosed ADHD without actually informing the UFC. Despite the fact that his suspension would have ended in February of next year, he was released by the UFC at the end of November, officially becoming a free agent and immediately starting the search for a new promotion. Despite his reputation being damaged somewhat by the rather unfortunate manner in which the UFC's career ended, Lee remains an attractive name, so it was no surprise when he received interest from a host of fighting promotions, with Lee eventually deciding to sign with Eagle FC. For those unaware, Eagle is actually a new company owned and run by former UFC lightweight champion Khabib Nurmagomedov, who is a personal hero of Lee's. It's likely that, as well as the fact that Eagle is introducing a 165-pound weight class, something Lee has wanted for a long time, are the largest contributors to Lee's decision. Will Eagle represent a chance for him to live up to the potential so many see in him? Only time will tell. Next up, UFC update COVID testing. Rumors are a tricky thing. Despite the fact that they are unconfirmed, people still tend to believe in them, especially if it's about bad news. We seem to crave negativity. The UFC will have known that like no other recently, as reports emerged in the last few weeks that the UFC was changing their COVID testing policy to a system where they would no longer be supplying testing kits to fighters, forcing both they and their corner personnel to arrange and pay for their crucial compulsory testing entirely on their own. Obviously, it's not like a UFC fighter is going to struggle to pay for a standard COVID test, but it's more the principle that matter, with many having felt that it was a petty move from the company, especially given the level of profit brought in thanks to those same fighters they were now forcing to pay for testing. Thankfully, however, it appears that those rumors are just that, rumors. On the 15th of December, the UFC issued an announcement with regards to their plans to update their COVID testing protocol, labeling the reports that they were going to force fighters to bear the cost for these tests incorrect and irresponsible. So what actually has changed? Well, in the past, the UFC shipped out testing kits to the homes of their fighters prior to their departure to head to whatever city the next event would be held at. However, due to how accessible cheap home testing kits have become, the company is now allowing fighters to simply grab their own tests from their local markets, and any cost of purchasing these tests will be reimbursed by the company. This both cuts out the cost of posting the test to the fighters and also makes things a lot more flexible, as the fighters are able to get their testing sorted whenever it's convenient to them, as opposed to waiting around for a package from the UFC to arrive. Before moving on, who is Tim Tszyu? Considering the fact that the next part of this video will be discussing someone who, till this point, has been identified solely as being Tim Tszyu's brother, probably a good idea to make sure that all of you are actually aware of who on earth Tim Tszyu is. To clarify, Tszyu isn't a UFC fighter, though he does utilize one of the more popular forms of combat adopted by MMA fighters, being a pro boxer. Born in Australia to Russian parents who themselves are of Russian, Korean, and Mongolian descent, it's pretty certain that his genetic heritage is a delightful mess, must make tracing back ancestry quite entertaining. The importance of his heritage doesn't stop with the nationalities, however, as his father, Kostya Tszyu, is a retired boxer who at his peak was an undefeated light welterweight welterweight champion, his career glittering so much that in 2011 he was inducted into the Boxing Hall of Fame. It'd be a fair suggestion to just assume that Tim went straight into boxing, given how successful his father was in the sport, but he actually spent most of his childhood practicing either gymnastics or soccer, getting so good at the latter that he was selected to play for local teams on multiple occasions. By the age of 15, however, his interest in the sport had begun to wane and he decided to drop altogether so that he could focus on his latest interest, boxing. It won't surprise you to hear that Tim took to the sport like a duck to water, amassing an amateur record of 33 wins and only 1 loss before turning pro with his debut fight against Zoran Cassidy, winning the first of many victories to accumulate a professional record that now stands at 20 wins, 0 losses. His most recent fight just this November saw the Aussie defeat Takeshi Inoue, retaining the WBO Global Light Middleweight title and winning the WBO Asian Pacific Light Middleweight belt in the same match. He currently stands undisputed as Australia's #1 super welterweight fighter. And that brings us to Nikita. Given the level of dominance that Kostya achieved in his career and the level of dominance that Tim has shown so far in his career, we're sure that professional boxers around the world are absolutely livid with the news that yet another Tszyu boxer is preparing to enter the professional sport. Nikita Tszyu, the younger brother of Tim, has announced that he has already signed a contract and will officially go professional in 2022. He's been dubbed by many as a boxing prodigy, and it seems that he almost skipped out on pursuing the sport as a career, having stepped away 6 years ago. It was whilst watching the success of his brother in the squared circle that Nikita apparently decided that he wished to give it a real go, relighting the fire. The 23-year-old declared that he wants to achieve that greatness that his father and, to an extent, his brother have achieved, noting how it was the feeling of being on the mat during his brother's post-fight celebrations against Dennis Hogan that finally convinced him to pursue boxing as a career. With Nikita citing his brother as his main motivation for returning to the sport, Tim has been very supportive of the decision and seems utterly convinced that Nikita will be a success, labeling his younger brother as a natural lion with an animal instinct. It should be noted that despite stepping away from actually taking on fights, Nikita has been an active part of Tim's training camps, meaning that he hasn't been away from the sport entirely. Nikita will be managed by Glenn Jennings, who is the man who managed Kostya and currently handles Tim's business too. One final fun thing to be aware of is that Nikita plans on entering the same weight division as his brother, so I'm sure boxing promoters around Australia are just salivating at the potential for a Tszyu versus Tszyu fight in the future. Nikita has a long way to go until then, of course, but with the pedigree he has going for him, who's to say he can't make it? And finally, more Nate. To wrap up this big week of UFC news, we can now tell you that Nate Diaz's contract has been extended by the UFC, though he hasn't actually re-signed anything yet. Basically, whenever a fighter is down to the final fight of their contract, as is the case with Diaz, their contract is automatically extended for 6 months until that final fight is completed. And with the UFC having just moved away from Nate's potential fight with the undefeated Khamzat Chimaev, it looks like he'll be sticking around for a while longer. Many are suggesting that the UFC are simply trying to buy some time until Conor McGregor's broken leg is healed, setting up a potential third match between the Irishman and Diaz. Whether we get that fight and whether Diaz eventually decides to sign on for more fights past the expiration of his deal is yet to be seen. And that's everything. Thanks for watching.